What is up, everyone? Purple and Gold podcast for Wednesday, February 25th. LSU loses to Mcneese last night, 7-6. Their 16-game winning streak dating back to last year is now over, and it was a very frustrating game, and we will talk all about it. A lot is going to be said about LSU's pitching and certainly hitting five guys and walking three and having as many pitchers used 10 as they did and as many of them be ineffective as they were is certainly the story of the game. However, LSU righted the ship over the last 5 innings. Reagan Ricken, Devin Sheeran, and Jaden Newt put up 5 zeros. And it was really, in my opinion, LSU's offense that couldn't get the big hit, couldn't drive in the big runs, and eventually couldn't overcome the deficit. Marcos Paz got the start. We talked about that as a possibility. He cruised through the first inning. He had a runner on first, 2 outs and 2 strikes in the second inning before it fell apart on him. And then Cooper Williams was surprisingly, to me, the first guy out of the bullpen. He allowed all three inherited runners to score. And even though he didn't give up any runs of his own, he just wasn't very good. And quite frankly, he hasn't been very good so far this year. And then it was a parade of guys, Dax Duffy and Zach Cowan and Maverick Rizzi. We saw Santiago Garcia get out of a big jam. But LSU trailed 7-2, cut it to 7-4. It was then 7-5 in the eighth inning when John Pearson hit a home run to make it 7-6. And in the ninth, LSU had 2 on and 2 out, and Seth Dardar flew to the warning track, came about 8 or 10 feet away from a walk-off 3-run homer. But there were spots in the game prior to that when LSU did get, I believe it was their third run. They had the bases loaded with 1 out, could only get 1 run out of that. There was another inning where Milam had walked. Zach York got ahead 2-0. Then he sort of expanded the strike zone a little bit. He had a chopper down the first base line, which the play was called fair. It probably wasn't fair, but you can't review that, and that wound up being a double play. And so it was just a very frustrating turn of events last night for LSU, and the Tigers lose 7-6. I do want to talk about a couple of things relative to LSU's pitching staff. One is I think LSU needs more out of some of these returning pitchers. Cooper Williams, Zach Cowan, Maverick Rizzi, particularly Williams and Cowan. They've been not very good options so far, and we know that they're both capable of much better than what they've shown. In addition to that, I do think it was encouraging that Reagan Ricken and Santiago Garcia and Devin Sheeran and others were able to have successful outings. And Reagan Ricken seems like he may be an option going forward. Devin Sheeran looks like LSU's best reliever. And I think if you compare Sheeran with Guidry and maybe get a little bit more out of Cowan and Williams and then Santi Garcia, you've still got the full boatload of relievers that we thought you had at the beginning of the year. LSU did make an error last night. It was Jake Brown on an overthrow. It was a costly error. But besides that, they played relatively clean defense. This was your typical midweek. LSU just came out and, probably didn't have the greatest approach the second through the fourth inning against Jarris Miller, who was a freshman from Barb High School. He was really mixing and matching and throwing some junk against LSU, and they just didn't have a great approach. Mcneese got a couple of big hits, including a 2-run single off Cooper Williams by Danny Barbero. Instead of it being a 2-2 game, it was a 4-2 game. They got an extra run on an inning where they got another 2-out hit to stretch the lead to 6-2 when maybe it should have been 5-2. And all of those things added up. Mcneese just got the big hits and LSU didn't. I don't think any of us are jumping off the boat, and I don't think there was anything necessarily to take away from last night's game that isn't fixable. The one thing I will say is I do think LSU's pitching staff has given up a lot of free passes, a lot of hit batters, a lot of walks early in the season, and that is something they will need to clean up. Now, I know when you have the kind of stuff that LSU has on this pitching staff, you're going to prioritize stuff if you want to lead the nation in strikeouts like LSU has the last 2 years over command. But there's got to be a little bit more of a threading of the needle between all of the hit batters and all of the walks. And look, I think it was just contagious in a bad way last night. Like I said, the back half of the game, between Ricken and Garcia and Sharon and Jaden Newt looked very good in the ninth inning. I want to give those guys props because it was not a team-wide effort. LSU used 10 pitchers. 4 of them were pretty good. And Dax Dathey wasn't terrible either. So, again, nothing really to jump off the boat about. In terms of LSU's offense, I just think it was one of those things. They just couldn't quite get the big hit. They couldn't quite, work that last walk or that last hit by pitch to put an inning over the top. And it was just one of those frustrating nights. And so it results in LSU's first loss of the season. LSU will bounce back and play 4 games this weekend. They'll play Dartmouth twice. They'll play Northeastern twice. And we will be back to cover it all. LSU basketball plays tonight, 8 o'clock Central Time against a reeling Ole Miss team. It is at Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a 1.5-point favorite. If there was ever a game that Matt McMahon was going to win and have some attempt at some job security, it is this one. I did want to talk a little bit about Gordon McKernan, who's one of LSU's big boosters, was on Matt Moscona's show yesterday. He was asked directly if he thought there were boosters who would be interested in buying out Matt McMahon and bringing back Will Wade. And he said he thought that the 2 guys in charge of this, and obviously he meant Jeff Landry and Lee Mallett, would certainly have a keen interest in doing that. He said he thinks there would be enough support financially to do it if that was the decision that LSU's decision makers ultimately land on. Jeff Borzello, who is a college basketball reporter for ESPN, as Oklahoma just walked off Arizona State 4-3, and Troy just held on to beat Georgia 6-5. Jeff Borzello, on his hot seat list today, he seemed to think that Matt McMahon was going to get another year. So LSU on the road tonight at Ole Miss, and we'll see what happens. We'll be back here tomorrow to cover that. As always, be good to one another, and always, 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 go Tigers.